going to be your screen, but first it'll just be us on the screen, and then I'll introduce, and then you can start sharing your screen.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let me stop doing that then, and then minimize. Okay, hello scholars, parents, and INTech team. This is our first day of our INTech guest speaker series, and today we have Kai Frazier with us of Kai XD Reality. It's a mixed reality company, and we're really excited to have her. Thank you for joining us this Monday, and I'm going to let you have the floor so you can start and tell our scholars a little bit more about what you do.
Sure. Sounds great. Thank you. So give me 1 second to share my screen. I think it should be up now. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So thanks for having me today. My name is Kai Frazier. I am an educator and now an ed tech entrepreneur. And what I do is I create inclusive and accessible VR for students. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about my motivations for creating a VR company and talk a little bit about the work my team and I do. I try to be very transparent that I never had any dreams to be in tech, and I have no formal tech background. In fact, my degrees are in history and education. So for that reason, I like to start from the very beginning and talk about my why as to how I started a VR company. So I started this journey probably started in high school when I grew up in a bit of a tumultuous household where at 16, I would suddenly find myself homeless. I couch surfed some nights, and some nights I slept in my car, that 95 or that 85 Toyota Corolla. And when you're focused on survival, you're really not worrying about your grades. So it's no surprise my grades were terrible. My motto was C's get degrees, and my worst subject was math. I would see the numbers and I would just break out in tears. It was my high school history teacher that told me the reason that I was terrible at math was because I was defeated before I ever started. I really had a hopeless mindset due to my circumstances. And her words completely changed my outlook on life. My world changed when the couple in the middle there, they took me in so I could graduate from high school and really focus on work. And they made a huge difference in my life. So when you've been shown grace like that, you have to pay it forward. So I became a teacher myself, working with a lot of at-risk students who reminded me of myself. So my classroom consisted of my homeless students like me, my undocumented dreamers, my students with disabilities, my illiterate students, my students who were failing. I had kids that are living in poverty, students with incarcerated parents, and students who just had no food at home. So they didn't eat on teacher work days, snow days, and things like that. And I also had a lot of kids who spoke no English. So it was a really challenging classroom, and it was my job to break down the lessons of history so they could better understand their worlds. However, most of my students had no context for what I was teaching because they rarely left their neighborhoods. So when you grow up like myself and the students I taught, there isn't money for vacations. And school field trips are our only opportunity to explore the world outside our neighborhoods. However, since 2010, about 50% of kids no longer take field trips because their schools can't afford them. With COVID-19, nobody's going on any field trips right now. And this is really unfortunate because when kids go on field trips, they're 95% more likely to graduate from high school. Kids see field trips and they see inspiring new ideas, sounds, locations, careers, and that changes their whole outlook on life. So I decided I was going to leave teaching in the classroom and I was going to go from teaching history to working directly with history. And I made my transition to working with some of the biggest museums in Washington, D.C. And it was my job to storytell and tell eyewitness stories so other students could see them. And it was a really cool job because I got to specialize in telling these stories. And a lot of the stories that I told were not the happiest stories. They were stories of Holocaust survivors, Syrian survivors, Rwandan survivors, civil rights leaders. But the way I told the stories, it started to make a big change. And some of my stories made it up to the U.S. Department of foreign affairs into Congress. And I didn't expect that. So that was my first time seeing that we could story tell to really cause changes. So I had no background in this either, but I made sure I YouTubed and Googled all my things until I figured out how to do this really well. But the problem I saw even with that is that while working in museums, I couldn't get a lot of students that looked like me to work in museums. I had my students lived about 30 minutes up the street from these museums where I worked, but because they couldn't afford the field trips, they never made it. And that meant that they didn't have careers in museums, and nobody ever wanted to have a career in a museum because they never saw it. So when I talked to kids about pursuing those careers, I started to see that that lack of field trips translated into jobs. So did you know that in an art museum, there are only 4% of people that look like me working there? There's only 3% Hispanic. So that meant that students could never dream of working in a museum because they never visited a museum. When you actually walk into a museum, this is what my day in a life looked like. So it wasn't uncommon that I was the only Black person there because nobody was making the outreach to make museums accessible. So I took all of these life experiences. I wanted to try to brainstorm a way that I could create exposure and access for students to the world around them. And I wanted them to be able to learn in a way that didn't exclude them because they lacked resources. And I thought that if I could show them these things, they could start to dream bigger than their circumstances and know that they could do anything they put their minds to. I had seen VR before, not too much. I had like a couple of touch points to it, but I thought that VR could be the opportunity to close these gaps. I could go and I could film something, film diverse museums. So in this slide, I filmed the Martin Luther King Memorial, and I could bring that back to students using VR, and all they had to do was use their cell phones to be right there. And that use of tech made their world more accessible. So I'm a firm believer that if you want to solve big problems, you have to take really big risk. And starting a company takes a lot of money. So I decided that I was going to sell my house, my car, and everything I owned. That first picture is me selling my house. The second picture is like all that I had left after I sold everything. And I took that money and I left Washington, D.C. to move to the San Francisco Bay Area. And I made an ed tech company, a VR company, so students could have that opportunity to use VR to learn all the cool things I was seeing in the world and have access to new careers, opportunities, and other things by using VR. And I always try to tell people that was a super scary move, and it's still scary every single day, but you learn to move in fear. And that's how I transitioned to becoming an ed tech entrepreneur, or becoming an educator to an ed tech entrepreneur. So my VR company focuses on bringing accessible VR field trips to students. And in that picture, you'll see I have a cell phone that is running the VR that I'm putting directly into the headset. And that's how I do most of the VR experiences for kids. So on our platform, we let kids take about over 100 VR field trips, ranging from the Obama portraits to astronaut training. And for a lot of the kids, it's their first time seeing the world beyond their neighborhoods. So that's really cool that we're able to do that. In addition to exploring the VR field trips, we also next month are adding a VR makerspace so kids can start to make their very own VR experiences. It's important to me that kids go from being consumers of VR to being producers of making their very own VR. So the last thing I just want to touch on, because I know my background isn't super technical, I wanted to just touch on some VR careers and mixed reality careers that you may see if you're interested in going in this direction. So when you're making VR, you usually make VR in 3 ways. It's a 360 filming, which is what I usually do. That first picture is me filming the Obama portraits, and you'll see the camera in front of them. You may go into a mixed reality studio, and that's when you have a green screen and everything basically that is covered in green can be graphics can be added to it. And the last one is being a VR developer. And that's usually the role when you are coding things from scratch and making VR worlds. So since I don't fall into a super tech background, I'm doing one of the most important roles that nobody ever talks about. I'm doing the writing and the communications for a lot of these VR filmings. So that means I'm writing the scripts, the storyboards, I'm pitching ideas most times. So any VR experience you're seeing, that came from somebody writing it down first. That's usually the first touch point for making VR. This picture is we were filming a VR experience at UC Berkeley for CRISPR, the DNA editing scientific breakthrough. So I have my friend here just holding cue cards. We can film this whole thing out. So the way this usually looks is I may have something like, this is one of my scripts. So I have to write everything from the locations to what the screen is gonna look like, to what the audio looks like, to what type of audio I like, what mood I want to be there. So it's a lot of, this is probably about a 30-second clip of me writing for a 8-minute experience. So it takes a lot of sitting down, writing, interviewing people just to get this together. I don't want to go over my time, but I will, this is just
Oh, no,
a
you're good.
really, okay, good. This is a really quick clip. So you can see like in that last thing, this is I wrote down one directional arrows in here. I wrote down, you can't really hear the sound now, but let me just turn it on. You'll hear a lot of the words that I was writing, some of the audio playing.
Gene editing is being tested to treat the painful blood disorder, sickle cell anemia. Sometimes when like the pain is like really, really bad, it feels like I'm getting bit by like a shark.
The groundbreaking technology of CRISPR.
So all of the words that are happening are basically from what I was saying in the last scene. I wanted magazine covers, I wanted audio from NPR, and that's what that looks like, that screen. Some of the most common roles you'll see is, this is one of my friends, Lauren Frazier, and she does, she's a mixed reality developer. So she makes VR games, and she's responsible for everything to what the characters look like, animation, scene development. And she told me one of her favorite things to do is creating worlds. So this is a clip of her VR experience that she is, or her game that she's just making. And what's really cool about this is when you have diverse people making different VR experiences and games, they look different. So you'll see a lot of women who are the main characters and things like that. And you usually don't see that in some games and different development. So I'll let this play for about 30 seconds so you can just see some of the worlds she created using just being a VR developer. Oops. Oh no, went too fast. The next one I have that I am going to show is Paige. Paige is an artist. So she does VR worlds at museums, basically just painting different scenes for kids. So although in this one she's an avatar and she's painting, she's usually just standing in an empty room and it looks nothing like this, and she paints different scenes. So this one she's just showing kids the basics of how to use VR and how to paint in VR. But this is one thing that people overlook, that we need artists in VR as well. So she does positive messages while she paints for kids, and it's really cool. Somebody else I'll highlight is Amanda. She's a mixed reality producer or director. So when we're doing VR filming, she's also one that's pitching the experiences. If it's kind of about thinking about like being on a movie set. So all the the people who are behind the scenes, the actors, she's directing all of them, making sure everybody hits their spots, so the production can actually happen. In her hand on the second picture, you'll see 2 VR cameras, and she's using those to make sure they film 360 degrees. But this is a really important role that's often overlooked as well when it comes down to VR production. And the last one I'll highlight is April. April is a mixed reality advocate. So she works for Microsoft, and the headset that you see is a HoloLens. So it's her job to get people involved in wanting to make VR, using the new VR equipment like that HoloLens, and then just showing them what they can do with it. So if it isn't for people like her, a lot of folks don't even know that these things exist. So she does really well just to make sure that you're seeing all the great things you can do with that tech. So I think I'm at my 15 minutes now. So I'm going to go ahead and pause for any questions that may be from the viewers.
Well, thank you, Kai. That was an amazing presentation and just a really awesome, inspiring story. So a few questions that I have. So you talked about how you sold your house, you sold your car, you sold everything to start your company, your business. So what would you say to those who are finding it difficult to chase their dreams? Because sometimes, like you said, you have to just jump in and hope for the best.
Yeah, it's a really scary situation to like take that big jump like that. So I always tell people that if your dreams don't scare you, you're not thinking big enough. So you're supposed to be scared for this. And usually people don't know where to start. And I always tell them to start where they are, start with what they know, and start with what they have. So you don't have to do some, like for me making a VR company, it was rare I had VR tools. Somebody lent me a really inexpensive, like $70 VR camera, and that's what I used to make a lot of my filming. So it wasn't so much the camera, it was, will I go outside and take the time to make the filming, to film the production, to go back and edit it. And that was the work. So I had I had a computer, I had YouTube videos,
Yeah.
so I could figure that out. So I couldn't wait for the perfect situation. And for a lot of this stuff, you're going to be scared almost every single day. But when you learn to move in the fear, they call that bravery. So we never ask you to not be afraid. We ask you to be brave. So you get used to being brave really quickly and being uncomfortable.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for that.
No
Another question we have is, I think a scholar picked up on the fact that you moved to start the company. So they're asking, why did you move across the country to start the VR company?
Sure, that's a great question. So I lived in Washington, D.C., and I could have started a VR company in Washington, D.C., but I don't have any tech background. So for me, D.C. is a big federal place. So it was a great place for museums, but as far as getting learning very fast for tech, that wasn't the best place for me to do it. So when I moved across the country to the Bay, and I was Silicon Valley adjacent, I could literally just walk into all the big companies that were doing the work and learn really quickly. So if I would have had more of a tech background, I could have stayed in DC. I had nothing. So by doing that, it was like a cheat code for me to learn very, very fast and talk to people that are making the big decisions. So that was extremely important for me, but you don't have to do it that way at all.
Right. So another question. You talk about how you didn't have any experience in tech and you had to learn really quickly. So I'm kind of curious as to what did that look like and how did you build your team? How did you find people to help you grow if you didn't have any experience?
Sure. So learning experience really quickly was I moved out here and I hit the ground running. So any conference I saw, I may have not had the money for it, but I would try to sneak into conferences and just be a fly on the wall. I usually take photos a lot. So I would just carry my camera and wear all black and people would think I worked there and they would never stop me. So I learned really quick how to sneak into conferences and learn. So once I was at conferences, I could talk to the people who were really making the changes and hear their insights. And those were things I didn't always hear at conferences in DC. And that's just because, if I wanted to go to federal conferences, DC is great for that, but for tech, not so much. So that was one great thing that I could do. And I got to experiment with a lot of different equipment that's out here. This being in the Bay was my first place I saw VR, a mixed reality studio. You don't find those very often in DC. So I got to learn directly from being on the locations for a lot of things. You had a second part to your question, but I forgot what you...
Right. Just how did you build your team?
Oh, my team. Yeah. So I got some crazy folks to join me. So I started what I had. I brought on my first year mentor teacher and she helps me with the education stuff. My best friend since first grade, she's an accountant. So she helps me with all the financing and legal things for the company. I have one of my close friends from college and he helps me with operations and customer service. So together we have really pretty much put together a VR team. The hard part I had was finding tech capabilities. So one of the things they don't talk about when you're starting a company, especially a tech company, is you usually go through a couple of tech people. So I had somebody I met at the museum who was a really great person and helped us with the tech early on. But he didn't grow as much as I needed him to when learning about VR. So I had to let him go. We had another dev crew that came on to help us with some of the VR stuff. And they just weren't a good culture fit. And I wasn't getting the product that I wanted. They were mostly building what they wanted and not so much what I wanted, which is very common. People don't talk about as well. So I had to let them go as well. So now we got some really good recommendations and we have a team based out in Spain. And they have an ed tech and VR background. So they are making a product that was past my dreams. Every time we get new pieces every day of the product as it's being built out. I'm just really happy with the decisions that we made. So the startup rule that they say is you have to hire slow and fire fast. And firing is a really hard thing, but what you'll start to see is that it's, like I said, it's very common to be in tech and not have the right development team that you want. And it takes a lot of tough decisions to get there.
Wow, a team in Spain. That sounds really, really fun, really interesting.
They're fun. Yeah, I enjoy them.
That sounds great. So we have another scholar asking a question, and So this scholar is asking, how many employees do you have? Maybe they're interested in some internship opportunities.
So right now I have 4 employees, including myself, and then I have my dev team that's in Spain. That's 2 people, and then I also have a group of designers in Toronto. That is also 2 people. They are recent graduates that I found. Always, as a teacher, I always want students, so I made sure that I found from the design, the feel, I went straight to students to put that together. And then I have students that I've taught before that help with different intern things from here and there, and they come on and help. But my core team is 4 people.
Okay. And I think you've kind of touched on this a little bit before with your story, but I know how you mentioned that you were in education and then you went to focus more on history. So can you kind of talk a little bit more about what motivated you to stay with tech, and kind of how did you make it to tech?
Sure. So tech is for me, and especially the working in VR, tech is amazing, but VR is nothing about the stories. And you'll see a big disconnect from some VR experiences that are maybe cool, they look fun, but you get bored of them really fast because they aren't a lot of storytelling in them. So I thought it was actually an advantage that I worked with a history degree and an education degree, because I don't see that out here. So when we're making educational products, it's very rare that a teacher is making an ed tech company. It's super rare. So that means that when making VR experiences, we know how to set them up so kids can actually learn from them. So like I said, like I said, it's not common, but I'm really glad that I've had that experience, and I've actually had to make my roles. Like I didn't get into tech because I thought tech was cool. I got into tech because I saw it as a way to make learning more accessible for my students. Like VR was a really powerful learning tool. I could teach all day about maybe science, or I could go film that CRISPR VR experience in a science lab at UC Berkeley, and the kids could put on the headset and really know the importance of why that scientific breakthrough is life changing for a lot of people. CRISPR has the ability to cure about 89% of diseases right now in the world, and people don't know about that. So I wanted to make sure I filmed that, and there's also women that are doing that work. So a lot of the VR experiences I make are diverse VR experiences that we don't see, and I made that a priority because when teaching, my students will often ask me, where are they in the history books? A lot of the history books did not include their contributions if they are people of color. So I make sure I film contributions of women, people of color, Black people. So right now, our next VR filming we're doing right now is with the Kauffman Foundation to view the Negro League Baseball Museum, because this year celebrates 100 years of their creation. If I don't make that experience, it doesn't exist. So like, for example, the Obama portraits, they're popular. Nobody has filmed those. So if I don't go out and film those, it doesn't exist. So that background of having that education and storytelling field makes it so we have really cool VR experiences that you don't see other places.
Wow, that was a great answer, and very interesting. And we're going to be wrapping up soon, so I'm going to ask you just a few more questions.
Sure.
What is some advice? You talked about your trials and like different things you went through when you were very young. What's some advice that you would give to your younger self, or even better, what's some advice that you would give to scholars when facing those trials?
A lot of those trials and those adversities make you who you are. I sometimes see friends that maybe I envied, and I just wanted to have like nice households like them growing up. And now that we've gotten a little bit older, it's clear that they sometimes don't know the first thing about creating for themselves or doing for themselves. And I've had to do it for such a long time that it is very easy for me. When you're doing a startup world, one of the people are afraid to start because it's very scary and they don't want to lose everything. Before I did this, I had a really great paying job, a really like nice house in the DC area. And just, I worked really hard for all of those things. So to give them all up is scary for most people. But I grew up losing everything when I was young. So I knew that losing everything or not having things was not the end of the world. And it really made me resilient to do this right now. So I don't think that I would have ever done this move if I hadn't known what it was like to lose everything and not be afraid of it. And that fear is what stops a lot of people from starting. So I'm extremely thankful for it. And then working with so many students like myself, or growing up in a challenging way, it gave me a special perspective to work with students like me. A lot of those students people don't like to work with because they're very challenging. They have a lot of character, but they're my favorites. So I know how fortunate I am to work with those kids, and I learn from them too. So I'm really thankful for everything that I have experienced because it helped me in every step of my journey.
Wow, yeah, that's a really great mindset. I think, to be bold and be brave, and it's okay to have fear, but just push through it. And I think that's really difficult for everyone to do, of all ages and all colors. So that's great. So as we're wrapping up, do you have any last final words for our scholars? Any last messages?
I will say that as far as just thinking about, the VR world, the tech world in general, a lot of the things that we're waiting to see created don't exist because we don't have enough people of color in tech. So even like I tell students all the time that, one day VR will be like TV channels and you'll see endless amounts of content from all different people, but we're not there yet. So it really takes students like you all to take a chance to start bringing your ideas to life. Even your ideas that make no sense, that are crazy, we still need those ideas as well. It doesn't have to make sense. And the more you, start thinking about those things, and you don't have to do it by yourself. If you have a friend who's also interested in stuff, you guys can work together, and we are all waiting to see what you all create.
Wow. Thank you. Once again, this is Kai Frazier, CEO and founder of Kai XR Mixed Reality. So thank you so much for joining us and spending this time to talk about your story, which was amazing and inspiring. And thank you so much. I just wanted to say thank you, scholars and parents, for joining us. And we will see you tomorrow for our next guest speaker.
Thank you.